The silence in our house had a texture. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of contentment. It was the taut, stretched silence of a canvas waiting for a violent slash of paint. For 5 years, I had learned to navigate the nuances of Julian's moods by the quality of this silence. Tonight, it was thin and brittle. He sat across from me in the living room, the low light from the lamp carving sharp angles onto his face, making him look more like a sculpture of a husband than the real thing. His eyes were on his laptop, but I knew his attention was elsewhere. It was always elsewhere, monitoring, assessing. "You should go to the company party, Eliza," he said, his voice cutting through the quiet without prelude. It wasn't a suggestion. With Julian, things rarely were. "I don't know, Julian. It's just a corporate thing at someone's house. I'll be bored." I kept my tone light, a practiced defense. "It's not about being bored," he countered, his gaze finally lifting from the screen. His eyes, a cool, clear gray, had a way of making you feel thoroughly examined. "It's about showing face. It's good for you to socialize, to be seen. You get too comfortable in your shell." Your shell. The way he said it made it sound like a personal failing he was magnanimously trying to correct. It was a familiar pattern. He would frame his control as concern, his commands as helpful advice for my own good. And like always, I felt the familiar, weary pressure to concede. It was easier than the argument that would follow, the patient, logical dismantling of my feelings until I was left feeling unreasonable and childish. "Okay," I sighed. "Okay, I'll go." A small, satisfied smile touched his lips before he returned to his screen. The silence resumed, but now it felt different. It was the silence of a settled matter, a check mark on his list. As I sat there, the memory of a different kind of quiet, a different kind of conversation, surfaced with an aching clarity. It was years ago, before the wedding, before the silences became textured with unspoken rules. We were parked by the reservoir, the rain drumming a soft, hypnotic rhythm on the roof of his car. The world outside was a blur of gray and green, but inside, everything felt warm and sharply focused. We had been talking for hours. The way you only do in the beginning, when you're excavating each other's souls, certain you'll find matching treasures. The conversation had drifted to past relationships, to betrayals, to the things that break people apart. I had been cheated on before, a clumsy, painful experience that had left me skittish. I told him this, my voice small in the intimacy of the car. He reached across the console and took my hand, his thumb stroking my knuckles. His expression was heavy with a sincerity that felt like an anchor in the stormy waters of my past. "If it ever happened," he said, his gray eyes holding mine, "I would need to know, straight away. No lies, no trickle. Truths." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "And if you told me, Eliza, if it only happened once, and you were honest with me immediately, I think I could forgive you. I truly think we could get through it. Honesty is the only foundation that can't be shaken." Oh, I remember the profound sense of relief that washed over me. It wasn't that I ever planned to be unfaithful, but his words felt like the ultimate safety net. It was a promise of grace. It made him seem so mature, so emotionally secure. It wasn't just a promise to forgive a hypothetical mistake. It was a testament to his belief in us, in our ability to withstand anything as long as we had transparency. It made me feel safe. It made me feel like our love was built on something real and indestructible. I held on to that promise like a sacred vow. It became the cornerstone of my trust in him, the bedrock upon which I built our entire future. Now, sitting in the brittle silence of our living room, that memory felt like a dispatch from another lifetime, a story about two people I no longer recognized. The man who made that promise seemed a world away from the man who now subtly engineered my social life for his own sense of order. I pushed the thought away. Marriage changes people, I told myself. Things become practical. The grand pronouncements of early love settle into the quiet routine of a shared life. But as I agreed to go to a party I had no desire to attend, a faint, cold whisper of doubt coiled in my stomach. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself it was just a party. I couldn't have known it was the first step off a cliff I never even saw. The party was exactly as I'd predicted, a loud, throbbing mass of corporate cheerfulness. Music pulsed from hidden speakers, and the air was thick with the smell of catered food and expensive perfume. People stood in tight, laughing clusters, their conversations a meaningless buzz, Julian, of course, was in his element. He moved through the crowd with an easy grace, a drink in one hand, clapping shoulders and sharing inside jokes. He introduced me to a few senior partners, presenting me with a detached pride, like a prized, well-behaved accessory. Then, assured I was settled, he was absorbed into the throng. I felt a familiar wave of social anxiety wash over me. I wasn't good at this, the small talk, the manufactured interest. I found a spot near the overflowing bar and ordered a glass of wine, then another. The alcohol worked as a dulling agent, softening the sharp edges of my discomfort. It made the noise more bearable, the smiles of strangers less intimidating. That's when Seth found me. He was from the marketing department, someone I'd exchanged pleasantries with in the break room but never really spoken to. He had a kind, open face and a way of listening that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. "Hiding out?" he asked with a gentle smile, gesturing to my corner. "Is it that obvious?" I laughed, a real laugh for the first time that night. We started talking. It was easy, effortless. He didn't talk about work or promotions. He asked about my abandoned art degree, about the books I was reading. He saw a flicker of the person I was before I became Julian's wife, a person I barely remembered myself. For the first time in a long time, I felt seen. Not assessed, not managed, but simply seen. I don't know how many glasses of wine I had. I lost count. The room began to swim, the buzzing conversations melting into a single droning note. Julian was a distant figure across the room, holding court, perfectly content. He hadn't looked my way in over an hour. A bitter, lonely feeling I'd long suppressed began to surface. One thing led to another. The conversation with Seth grew more personal, the space between us shrinking. There was a shared glance, a moment of charged silence. The party was thinning out, but the world had already narrowed to just the two of us. He suggested we get some air on the back patio. The cool night air was a shock, but not enough to clear my head. I don't want to recount the sordid details. They are seared into my memory like a brand, a collage of shame and regret, a shared car ride that should have been a taxi home, an apartment that wasn't mine. A mistake. A huge life-altering catastrophic mistake. The morning after was a brutal awakening. I woke up in an unfamiliar bed, the pale dawn light filtering through the blinds, illuminating my guilt. The taste of stale wine was in my mouth, and a cold dread was coiled in my stomach. I slipped out without a word, my clothes feeling like a costume of shame. The drive home was a silent scream. Every traffic light, every street sign, seemed to mock me. When I walked through my front door, the house was quiet. Julian was already at the gym. I stood in the hallway, the scene of the crime not being a physical place, but my own body, my own broken vows. I looked at myself in the hall mirror and saw a stranger. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with a horror that felt bottomless. I hate myself for it. I still do. Every second since it happened has been a form of self-flagellation. But through the suffocating fog of guilt, one thought, one memory, began to pulse with a desperate, urgent rhythm. Julian's promise. Honesty is the only foundation that can't be shaken. It echoed in my mind, a frantic mantra. He had given me a lifeline all those years ago. It was a terrible test, a test I had failed spectacularly, but the rules were clear. Tell me straight away. If it only happens once, I think I could forgive you. The thought that I could fix this, that there was a path back from this abyss, took root. It was a sliver of hope in an ocean of despair. The guilt was eating me alive, and the only antidote I could imagine was confession. The secret was a poison, and the only way to survive was to purge it. I would tell him. I would throw myself at his mercy, clinging to the promise he made in the rain-streaked car, the promise that had formed the very bedrock of our marriage. I had to believe in it. It was the only thing I had left. For 2 days, the secret was a physical presence in our home. It sat between us at the dinner table, a monstrous, invisible guest. It lay in the bed, pushing us to opposite edges of the mattress. I could barely eat or sleep. Every time Julian spoke to me, his voice, calm and normal, was like a hot poker against my conscience. I knew I couldn't wait any longer. The guilt was hollowing me out from the inside. I chose a quiet evening. The television was off, the house settled into its nightly rhythm. Julian was reading on the couch. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I thought he must be able to hear it. "Julian?" My voice was a thin, reedy thing. He looked up, his expression neutral. "Yes? Can we talk? Do you remember? Do you remember a long time ago? We had a conversation about cheating?" He frowned slightly, a small crease appearing between his brows. "We had a lot of talks like that early on, Eliza. You were pretty hung up on it." "Which one?" His tone was dismissive, as if recalling our history was a chore. "The one in your car," I pushed, my hands twisting in my lap. "By the reservoir. You said if I was ever honest, if it only happened once, you could forgive me." He was quiet for a moment, his eyes searching my face. A flicker of something I couldn't decipher, curiosity, suspicion, passed through them. "I remember," he said slowly. "Why?" This was it. The precipice. I took a deep, shuddering breath, and the words tumbled out. A torrent of shame and regret. I told him everything. The party, the wine, Seth, the hotel. I left out no detail of my failure. I cried, my words choked with sobs. I told him how disgusted I was with myself, how the only thing that kept me going was the memory of his promise. I begged him to forgive me, to help me understand how I could have done something so terrible. I ended my confession in a heap of misery, waiting for the verdict. His reaction was immediate and terrifying in its silence. The blood drained from his face, leaving it a rigid white mask. He didn't shout. He didn't rage. He simply stared at me, his eyes wide with a look of pure, unadulterated mortification. Then, without a single word, he stood up, walked into our bedroom, and began pulling a suitcase from the top of the closet. Panic seized me. "Julian, no! Please, talk to me, say something!" I followed him, grabbing his arm, my tears making blurry trails on his shirt. He shook me off, not violently, but with a firm, detached finality. "I need to cool down," he said, his voice flat and empty. "I can't be here right now." He packed a few things with methodical, chilling efficiency, zipped the bag, and walked to the front door. I pleaded, I begged, I promised I would do anything to fix it. He never looked at me again. The click of the front door shutting was the loudest sound I had ever heard. The next day was a blur of unanswered calls and frantic texts. Finally, in the evening, he returned. He looked tired, but his face was set like stone. He sat down in the same spot on the couch as the night before. I started again, my voice hoarse from crying. "Julian, please. I know what I did was unforgivable. But you promised. You said if I was honest." And then he did something that shattered my world into a million irreparable pieces. He laughed. It wasn't a laugh of amusement or hysteria. It was a low, cold, hollow sound that held no warmth, no humanity. It was the sound of a lock clicking into place, of a trap springing shut. He looked at me, a cruel, knowing smirk playing on his lips. "Oh, Eliza," he said, shaking his head as if I were the most naive child in the world. "Did you really believe that?" I couldn't process the words. "What? What do you mean?" "That promise," he said, leaning forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "That whole heartfelt speech in the car? I only said that to make sure that if you ever did cheat, you'd come running to me to confess. It was insurance, a way to guarantee I'd always have the upper hand. I never meant a word of it." The air left my lungs. The room tilted, the floor seeming to drop away beneath me. It was a physical blow, more painful than any slap or punch. Every cherished memory of that rainy afternoon, every ounce of security I had drawn from that promise, turned to ash in my mouth. It wasn't a foundation, it was a cage, and I had just willingly locked myself inside. "But why?" I whispered, the question feeling impossibly small in the face of such colossal deception. "Why?" He leaned back, spreading his arms wide in a gesture of mock generosity. "Because now, everything is simple. You broke our vows. You admitted it. There's no ambiguity." He paused, letting the cruelty land. "And by the way, that prenup you barely read? The one I told you was just a formality? It has a very strict infidelity clause. You leave with nothing. Exactly what you deserve." I stared at him, at this stranger wearing my husband's face. The man I had loved, the man I had trusted with my deepest vulnerabilities, had not only planned for my failure but had actively engineered the terms of my destruction. The confession hadn't been a path to forgiveness. It had been the trigger for my own execution. In the days that followed, the house became a museum of our dead marriage. Julian moved with a chilling calm, a man executing a long-prepared plan. He spoke to me only when necessary, his words clipped and transactional. There was no grief in his eyes, no flicker of the pain a betrayed husband should feel. There was only a cold, quiet satisfaction. He was a business executive closing a successful, if unpleasant, deal. I tried, in my desperation, to reason with him. One evening, I found him in his study, sorting through financial documents. "Julian, please," I began, my voice trembling. 5 years. Don't they mean anything? The life we built, the good times. You can't just throw it all away because of one mistake. He didn't even look up from his papers. "It doesn't matter, Eliza," he said, his voice flat. "You made your choice. Now I'm making mine." The finality in his voice was like a slammed door. I felt a surge of defiant anger, a need to make him see the part he had played. "And what about your choice?" I pressed. "To lie to me? To build our entire relationship on a trap? How long have you been planning for this, waiting for me to fail?" He finally looked at me then. He smirked, a sliver of ice in his eyes. "I wasn't planning on it," he said smoothly. "But you gave me the perfect excuse." The perfect excuse. The words hung in the air, venomous and revealing. It wasn't about my betrayal, it was about his opportunity. My catastrophic mistake hadn't broken his heart, it had handed him a key. A key to a cage he had built around me, a key to an exit that left him with everything and me with nothing. Left alone in the hollow silence of the house, my mind began to work furiously, re-examining the architecture of our life together. It was like turning on a black light in a pristine room and suddenly seeing all the hidden, filthy stains. Every memory was tainted, every gesture recontextualized. His insistence on handling all our finances, which I'd once seen as him being protective and responsible, now looked like a way to keep me dependent and ignorant. His subtle criticisms of my friends, which I'd mistaken for a desire for us to be a self-contained unit, now seemed like a deliberate tactic of isolation. The prenup, which he had presented so reasonably as a way to protect both of us, was now clearly revealed as a weapon designed to protect only him, forged long before any hint of trouble. He was the architect of my ruin, and I had been his willing assistant, handing him the tools of my own destruction. He had studied my insecurities, my deep-seated need for honesty and reassurance, and he had used them against me with surgical precision. The promise wasn't just a lie, it was a bespoke manipulation tailored perfectly to my psyche. The legal papers arrived a week later via a courier. Cold, impersonal documents that outlined the dissolution of our marriage and my forfeiture of all marital assets, as stipulated by the infidelity clause in the prenuptial agreement. He had already hired a top-tier lawyer. I could barely think straight, let alone figure out how to protect myself. I sat on the floor of our bedroom, surrounded by the life we had built, the furniture we'd picked out, the photos on the wall of a smiling, happy couple, and felt an overwhelming sense of vertigo. Was any of it real? Did he ever love me? Or was I just a project to him, something to control and shape and, ultimately, discard when I no longer served my purpose? The guilt over what I had done was still there, a heavy, suffocating cloak. But now, a new feeling was rising up to meet it, the cold, terrifying realization that I had been sharing my life not with a partner, but with my own personal saboteur. In the suffocating silence of the house, my loneliness became an active, malevolent force. The walls seemed to be shrinking, the air growing thin. My phone, once a connection to the outside world, was now a symbol of my isolation. I would check it every few minutes, a desperate Pavlovian twitch, hoping for a message from Julian, a sign of remorse, a willingness to talk, anything. But nothing came. The digital silence was as absolute as the physical one. In a moment of profound weakness and despair, I did something I never thought I would do. I reached out to Seth. It wasn't for romance or absolution. I just felt so utterly alone, so completely responsible for this cataclysm, that I thought maybe, just maybe, the other person involved might offer a sliver of understanding. He was the only other soul on the planet who shared a piece of my specific guilt. I texted him late one night, my fingers fumbling on the screen. I need to talk to someone. My life is falling apart. He didn't respond until the next day. A single message notification lit up my screen, and for a foolish second, my heart leaped with a desperate hope for connection. I opened it. I think it's best if we don't talk. That was it. No apology. No empathy. Not even a sorry to hear that. It was a cold, clean amputation. He acted as if it had never happened, as if I were a stranger who had dialed the wrong number. The sting of it was surprisingly sharp. I had been a momentary lapse in judgment for him, an anecdote he would probably never tell. For me, it was the epicenter of my world's collapse. To be discarded so easily, so completely, felt like a confirmation of my own worthlessness. With nowhere else to turn, I made the call I had been dreading. I called my parents. I pictured them in their quiet, orderly home 3 states away, a place where life followed predictable, respectable patterns. My failure felt like a bomb I was about to detonate in their peaceful world. I poured my heart out to my mother, the words tumbling out in a broken, tearful rush. I told her everything: the party, the affair, Julian's reaction, the lie about the promise, the prenup that would leave me destitute. I laid my entire, shattered life at her feet, hoping for solace, for the unconditional comfort a child expects from their mother. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear her take a deep, weary sigh. Then my father's voice, stern and distant, came on the extension. "You made your bed, Eliza," he said, his voice devoid of any warmth. "Now you have to lie in it." My mother added, her tone thick with disappointment, "What were you thinking? You had a good husband, a beautiful home. You had everything, and you threw it all away. Do you really expect us to feel sorry for you?" Their words hit me like a physical blow. I had come to them for a lifeline, and they had handed me an anchor. There was no room for the nuance of Julian's manipulation, no acknowledgement of the years of subtle control. In their black and white world, I was the adulterer, the homewrecker. I was the one who had brought shame upon them. I have to go," I stammered, my throat closing up. I hung up the phone, and the silence that rushed back in was heavier, more profound than before. It was the silence of absolute abandonment. My husband had revealed himself as my enemy. My lover had revealed me as disposable. And my own parents had revealed me as a disappointment they couldn't bear to comfort. I was an island, a desolate, storm-battered rock that no ship would ever approach again. The guilt, the shame, the heartbreak, it all swirled together into a single, overwhelming feeling of being utterly, irrevocably alone. I had made a terrible mistake, but the punishment felt biblical in its totality. It was as if the universe itself was conspiring to erase me, to punish me not just for my actions, but for my naivety, for trusting someone who never deserved it in the first place. The divorce papers lay on the coffee table, a crisp, white monument to my failure. Julian had left them there for me to find, another cold, efficient act in his campaign of methodical erasure. For days, I circled them as if they were a venomous snake, unable to touch them, unable to look away. Signing them felt like consenting to my own annihilation. Not signing them felt like prolonging the agony. My mind became a courtroom, where I was simultaneously the prosecutor, the defendant, and the judge. The prosecutor was relentless, replaying my mistake at the party on a loop, highlighting every stupid, selfish decision. "You did this," it screamed. "You broke your vows. You deserve the consequences." But the defense attorney, a weaker, more hesitant voice, would whisper back, "He lied to you from the beginning. He built a trap and baited it with love. Is one night of weakness equal to 5 years of calculated deception? What kind of love sets someone up to fail?" I would spend hours just sitting on the couch, staring at the walls, caught in this internal crossfire. Who was I more angry at? Myself, for letting it happen, for being so blind? Or him, for being the monster hiding in plain sight? My family's judgment echoed in my ears. They always warned me he was too controlling, too cold. I had defended him, every single time, convinced their perception was flawed, that they just didn't understand the depth of our connection. The irony was a bitter pill to swallow. The worst part was the insidious residue of love, or what I had believed was love. In my loneliest moments, I would find myself missing him. Not the cold architect who had just dismantled my life, but the man from the early days. The man who made me laugh, the man who held me when I was sick, the man who made that beautiful, treacherous promise in the rain. I was grieving a man who had possibly never existed, a phantom I had created out of my own hopes and his carefully constructed lies. Was any of it real? Or was I just a pawn in a long, cruel game he was playing with himself, a game designed to prove he always held the upper hand? The question of what to do next felt impossibly large. Part of me, the part that still felt the sting of injustice, wanted to fight. To hire a lawyer, to challenge the prenup, to expose Julian for the manipulator he was. But how do you fight someone who has been 3 steps ahead the entire time? He had the money, the power, the clear-cut narrative of the wronged husband. I had nothing but my broken word and a story so full of insidious manipulation it sounded paranoid, unhinged. I felt exhausted just thinking about it, a bone-deep weariness that went beyond lack of sleep. Another part of me felt like I deserved to lose it all. Maybe this was my penance. Maybe this was karma, a brutal lesson I needed to learn the hard way. Maybe I should just sign the papers, walk away, and accept my fate as the author of my own misery. Let him have his victory. But as I sat there in the deafening quiet, a new thought began to surface, small and fragile. It wasn't about fighting him or surrendering to him. It was about surviving him. The idea of starting from scratch at this point in my life felt impossible, terrifying. But the idea of remaining tethered to this ghost, to this life built on a lie, was even worse. I looked at the divorce papers again. They weren't just an ending. They could also be a beginning. A brutal, painful, rock-bottom beginning. The truth is, I'm tired. I'm tired of fighting, tired of apologizing, tired of trying to make sense of the senseless. I don't know what happens next. I don't know if I'll ever trust anyone, including myself, ever again. But maybe it's time to stop trying to understand Julian's game and start figuring out my own. Maybe it's time to let go of the life I thought I had, to grieve it like a death, and then, somehow, to start over, to figure out who I am without him, without the gilded cage he built around me. It feels like an impossible task. But perhaps the first step is to pick up the pen, not to surrender but to release, to sign my name and accept that this chapter is over, and then face the terrifying, silent, empty page of whatever comes next, and begin to rebuild my life, piece by painful piece.